Michigan defeats Washington in the college football championship game 34-13. And there's plenty that Penn State football can take away from this game specifically, but also an unfriendly reminder of how much they wasted an elite caliber defense.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Penn State fans? You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, bringing you all things Penn State football and so much more. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. If you're not already, become an everydayer for all the latest in Penn State football analysis, men's basketball, so much more. We're going to have men's hockey and wrestling shortly enough here. Subscribe to the channel for all of those latest conversations around it and wherever you get your podcasts. Michigan defeats Washington 34-13, and that's not fun to watch as a Penn State fan. Penn State spectator, Penn State reporter, that Michigan's able to do this, but Penn State was not. And I think the glaring part of it all, when you hold up the mirror in this case, is that Penn State had the caliber defense to get to that spot. There were a lot of other elements that, you also need to be able to have an offensive coordinator that you can retain to get to that point, and all the other parts to it, wide receivers that can get open, quarterbacks that aren't afraid to take risks. We know that Drew Aller was afraid to take risks or was being told not to. Whatever the case was, actually, we know that there were elements of it, but Penn State had a defense that was definitely comparable to Michigan's. The statistics say that they were even slightly better in some cases, but the top three defenses in all of college football this year came from the Big Ten: Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. And Michigan wins the championship by the exact formula that Penn State was essentially running. Penn State took the ball away from Drew Aller and said, you know what, we're going to rely strictly on our defense. Do not turn the football over, Drew. And we're going to use the ground game with our two dynamic running backs to propel us to victory. Michigan did exactly that. Relied on elite defense, took the ball out of J.J. McCarthy's hands, and relied on, and they threw to 4 different receivers. They threw to 4 different targets in a championship game. They relied on Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, who combined for over 200 yards together and 4 touchdowns, and then a defense to absolutely stonewall and what we were led to believe and what we saw all season, an elite Washington defense. But it's not that Penn State's defense was far behind or that they weren't in the same conversation as Michigan's defense. No, they were. Right? They held Michigan to 24 points this season. Other teams were not able to do that. And I know that Alabama had held them, and then it took overtime, right? They held them to 20. But I also think that if Penn State doesn't go for it at their own 30 in that game, then maybe even the total is set to 17. But let's look at let's put some pressure on the pain point here, as this is what the defense was able to do this season. And top across the nation in a lot of other categories as well. But just to summarize it here, Penn State had an 18 turnover margin defensively, 24 forced to 6 turnovers lost. And then, okay, the offense protected the football. They did what they were asked to do. But the Nittany Lions led the nation in turnovers forced and the turnover margin. So Manny Diaz, of course, relevant to this conversation as well, even though he's not with the defense anymore. He's not with the team. But this is what happened in 2023. 48 sacks, most in the nation. 101 tackles for loss. That was number one among Power 5 teams, and then 3 shutouts. I know this was against Iowa, UMass, and Michigan State, not exactly the best offenses in the world, but 3 shutouts in one season. And then 223.3 yards per game, best in the country as well. So this is what the defense did, and Penn State still went. This is a defense that wins you a national championship game. This is a defense that wins you Big Ten conferences at a very minimum. So what did the offense do? Because the defense did this in spite of everything else, because Penn State's offense was in most games sustaining longer drives. But I would, you look at those statistics, and that is nothing short of impressive, because of, you don't have a juggernaut on offense. So that means the defense is out there a little more. They're playing more snaps. They're on the field a little more, and they're doing all of this too. Yet this is the results that took place. Now, offensively, these are some statistics that kind of tell the entire story. Total offensive plays, the explosive plays. James Franklin always talks about, oh, we got to win the explosive plays battle. 40 plus yards. Penn State had 6 of them in 2023 with a 5-star quarterback, 5-star running back, another high-end 4-star, two high-end caliber players at running back. I had good tight ends, best offensive line in Penn State, in the last decade for Penn State football. Compare that to 2022 with Sean Clifford. He's not that good. Is he even really an NFL quarterback? It's just Parker Washington. It's just Mitchell Tinsley. We don't know that Brenton Strange is the best tight end in that room. Penn State had 17. 17. That is almost triple. So last year's, and remember, Singleton and Allen were just freshmen, and the offensive line was good, but not as good as 2023's. But Penn State had 17 of those explosive plays compared to 6 in 2023. The ranks, so let's dial it back a little bit. Cut the yardage in half. So instead of 40 plus yard plays, how about 20 plus yard plays? Penn State's national rank for plays that were 20 or more yards offensively, 106th. That's comparable to what, Rutgers? This year's team, sorry, Tom Allen, this year's Indiana. Though that's bad. That's bad. When you look at the passing attack in terms of yards per play or just total yards in general per game, in the 80s among FBS teams, running attack with Singleton and Allen in the backfield, 50 in the 50s in yards per carry, yards per game. That's not good. That's not good. And that is why Penn State was not able to move to that next spot, to beat Ohio State, to beat Michigan. And it has to sting. It does, because the defense was number one in so many categories. Michigan was number one in other categories. Now they were number one in the category that matters most, winning all your games and winning the national championship, winning the college football playoff. They did that. So Penn State can pat itself on the back and say, well, we led all these categories defensively, but there's really nothing to show for it. You had a 10-3 season. You lost in the Peach Bowl. And I know what everyone might say as a counter argument. Well, look at the Peach Bowl, because if Penn State went up against an If you replace them there with Michigan, you lose to Alabama, and probably this version of the team, absolutely. But I'm saying, what if the offense just did a little bit more? What if the offense wasn't so keen on just protecting the football, had a little bit more of a dynamic, a tendency to try the explosive plays, to trust the 5-star quarterback that we know from an arm talent standpoint is better than Sean Clifford. Drew Aller has more arm talent than Sean Clifford, but Sean Clifford's certainly the smarter quarterback, the more mentally tough quarterback. And people in my comments agree that if you play as a pedestrian and you're not the aggressor, you can't be a quarterback. You can't be that. So Drew Aller has to be able to shed some of those tendencies going into 2024 if they want to make this situation better offensively, because it was not the defense's fault in any situation. So you bring up the Peach Bowl. Oh, well, Ole Miss scored 38 points, and Penn State was out without Adisa Isaac, Chop Robinson, Abdul Carter, Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, Those are all conference players, all America players, and future NFL starters, may I add you. So that's the conversation here. I mean, Penn State held Michigan to 24 points, and to see Washington just get bulldozed the entire game mostly, I think that Penn State just has to. It's going to linger a little bit. What could have been for them, but other general takeaways, because now the Big Ten is going to expand in 2024. Penn State's going to face Washington. Penn State's going to face USC, UCLA, and Oregon in due time. But Washington had no answer for Michigan's running attack. 100 plus yards and 2 touchdowns each from Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. And Edwards had 6, 7 carries in that game. The explosive plays. Washington, they have the talented players, don't get me wrong, but schematically they had no answer. I don't want to say that they were outcoached, but the style of play, you didn't adjust it. So I guess in that sense, you were outcoached because you didn't make the necessary adjustments. Yes, there was that period where Michigan's offense did go to sleep, but so did Washington's. Washington's offense was nowhere to be found. So the defense made some plays, but Michigan was able to do what it wanted to do at will. They didn't turn the ball over. They kept running the football effectively and used good defense, and they got pressure on Michael Penix. So Penn State has a similar style of play to Michigan, if you can believe that. Ohio State did as well. Don't turn the football over. Now they had a Marvin Harrison Jr., but we'll use our key star players to make big plays for us, and we'll rely on the ground game of Travion Henderson, Singleton. Do you notice all the common themes here? Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. You can debate who's better, and we all know where those groups would rank among one another. But now for Ohio State, they're all right, and Quinshon Judkins transferring. So, but I'm getting at that they all followed a similar pattern here. We have a talented quarterback, but we're going to still protect the football and not give turnovers to the other team to keep them in this game. We're going to rely on good offensive line play, talented running backs, and we're not just going to rely on a bell cow. We're going to split the usage between our 2 best guys so that they can be ready to go in the fourth quarter. That was the winning formula. So Penn State was there, but didn't dig far enough? I don't know, because they had the elements, because Michigan did it, Ohio State did it, Penn State was doing it, but Michigan and Ohio State did it better than Penn State, as we all can see. So my point being is that Washington, who had no answer for it, is now coming into the Big Ten. USC, who probably wouldn't have an answer for it, finished 8-5. So the team that struggled in the Pac-12 this past season and lost to Washington, and Michigan beat up on Washington, and now those teams are coming into the Big Ten. We'll see how Oregon adjusts. UCLA had a very good defense as well. But if Washington has problems with it, well, welcome to the Big Ten, my friends. That's really the offense, the play style. It's really the Pac-12 defenses are going to have headaches. And then we'll finish with this. There's the argument that, Big Ten defenses are only good because they play bad offenses. They only play against bad offenses. Michigan held Washington to 13 points in a championship game. So you put your best plays together. There's no holding back. You have your best plays together. You don't try to diversify your offense to save things and be strategic. It's all or nothing at this stage. And Washington, analytically, a top 5 offense, and statistically, the numbers too as well, only put up 13 points. So Oregon, UCLA, USC, in addition to Washington, all doing just that. How far is that going to get you in the Big Ten? So we're going to be talking about that, an early look at the Big Ten in 2024, but also another way too early look at Penn State. General thoughts to get an idea of how Penn State is going to do in the Big Ten. Some people say 7-5, 8-4, but now we have the transfer portal additions that are coming to Penn State, and see what that does for the team in a Big Ten conference that is truly a free-for-all. I don't know who I could make a favorite at this point, but I'll expand upon that in just a moment. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. The NFL playoffs are now here. The NFL regular season is behind us, but there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is super easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays. You can now find bets in the new Explore tab, and you can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and so much more. So visit fanduel.com/locked on and make your first bet a layup. That is fanduel.com/locked on. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And the Locked On Podcast Network is making history. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Check in on the comments as we are doing this live. And Robert says, I learned that sometimes cheaters do win, and it's surprising how many justify it as normal activity. And Jeffrey says, yeah, I feel like we wasted the season with the number one defense. What a bummer. So, Jeffrey, I'm glad you see my point. To Robert, I appreciate the comment as well. Michigan, I want to point out this because I'm not involved in the investigation. And the research is exhausting. The fact that because you look at the Houston Astros back in 2017, I know that's baseball, and it's also funny that Michigan wins the college football playoff with the cheating accusations in Houston, in the Texans stadium. So be it, besides the point. But all of it is very suspicious. Okay, there's the allegations there, everything's alleged, right? But and I'm not going to recite every single detail and every single report that is out there, but it's all suspicious. There's a guy that is conveniently on the sidelines for opponents that you're playing down the road. You have coaches or people that you hired allegedly in the stands to tape sidelines at games of future opponents. And all what for? I am not condoning cheating by any means. And I don't, that's why I want to preface that, because my next sentence is going to I want to wrap my head around this. Why, as a college football playoff contender, a Major League Baseball World Series contender, why are the teams like the Houston Astros and the Michigan Wolverines, who are very good on paper, these teams were and are the best teams and will go down as such in history. Why do you feel the need to cheat if that's the case, allegedly? We know, well, it's not alleged with the Astros. We know that for a fact. But the whole idea that undisputed world champions with Michigan, I find that funny because the investigations are still going on. People are going to talk to people to continue to do those interviews. And in the case of Michigan, with the unnamed donor that had bankrolled all of this, people with money don't just fly under the radar, if that makes sense. So you can't tell me that one rogue donor, one rogue assistant coach were the only ones involved in all of this. And that was their motive. So they got together, they went together, collaborated, and said, we're going to push Michigan to a national college football playoff because that's what Jim Harbaugh would want. That's what Sharon Moore would want. And that's what these players deserve. And it was one millionaire, billionaire, and one staff member that did all of this, allegedly. I just find that intriguing. You have to just ask questions. Ask the questions. And I'm eager to see what reports continue to come out about all of this. So I can't say, yes, Michigan is guilty, because until you have a definitive report that says what, and then punishments and sanctions and everything else, we'll see what Michigan does. Maybe like Houston, where they ask for immunity. But I'm not going to sit back and say, well, Michigan didn't deserve the championship because of what we think they did. Until we know for sure, it's innocent until proven guilty in my book. And I know on a Penn State show, that's not what everybody wants to hear. But that's my thoughts on the whole Michigan alleged cheating scandal is why do it when you don't need it? Same thing with Houston. Houston didn't need to do it, yet they still did it. Michigan didn't need to do it, and they still allegedly did it. I that's what makes me scratch my head about all of it. But how about a way too early look at Penn State football for the 2024 season? And this is more in general because we continue to discuss the news of the transfer portal players that are coming in, players that are leaving the roster. And then Drew Aller, Nicholas Singleton, the continued development of key players, denied Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter. So there are a lot of talented players on this team. But generally speaking, with Penn State in 2024, this is the toughest schedule that they are going to face in recent memory. I don't think there is an easy stretch of the schedule outside of course, Bowling Green, a bye week, Kent State, and then Illinois. It's that stretch when you have UCLA, you go to USC, then you have a bye week, but then you're back on the road. So does that bye week even matter? Then you go to Camp Randall and you play, assumedly, a better Wisconsin team, Ohio State, and then the national champion runner-up, Washington. And then you got to go back on the road twice to finish the season, Purdue, Minnesota. But that 5-week stretch there, that 5-week stretch, or I guess 6 weeks in the case of the bye week, UCLA, USC, bye week, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Washington. Man, that's the gauntlet if I've ever seen one. And then it doesn't let up. It does not let up with going on the road back to back because Purdue's trying to get better. Minnesota's trying to get better. And we've seen Penn State struggle on the road at Minnesota. Now, that was a few years back, and they ideally should have won that game, but they didn't. And I'm not saying this upcoming Minnesota team is going to be as good as that 2019 team. But the schedule does not, there is no, it's not like the SEC where they schedule an FCS team or another Group 5 team down below at the end of the season. You got to go on the road back to back after you finish playing Wisconsin, Ohio State, and Washington all in the span of 3 weeks later in the season. These games aren't early in the season. They're later on in the season. So you already got bumps and bruises, and knock on wood, hopefully no injuries, but you know that injuries are a part of the game. So this is easily the toughest schedule that James Franklin's going to face and that Penn State's going to face in what, decades? Seriously, really, decades. Now, you are returning veterans at key positions. There's the debate, okay, key players that you're returning. Of course, we know who the key players are, but I'm talking about returning those players at key positions. Quarterback. Penn State gets the returning starting quarterback in Drew Aller. What's going to happen with Ohio State, Washington? Well, we know Will Howard's coming in, but he's not a returning starter for Ohio State. And what really is the difference between Will Howard and Kyle McCord, even though Will Howard might be a little more mobile? But Ohio State's going to have a new starting quarterback. Washington's going to have a new starting quarterback. Oregon's going to have a new starting quarterback. UCLA was supposed to have Dante Moore. He's now at Oregon, but UCLA is going to have a first-time full starting quarterback. USC is going to have a new starting quarterback. Michigan is expected to have a new starting quarterback because J.J. McCarthy is going to go to the NFL. Maryland's going to have a new starting quarterback. Michigan State's going to have a new starting quarterback. Okay, you get my point. You get my point. All those teams now have a new signal caller to go along with some teams have new coaches, like Michigan State, Indiana. And you are going to have a different dynamic, and that takes time. So Penn State got all of that out of the way in 2023 and now have Drew Aller in place to return. Yes, it's a new offense. Yes, it's Andy Kotelnicki's offense with the multiple systems, but you have a returning veteran coming back. And this is his third year in the program. He got playing time in 2022, started in 2023, all 13 games, and then 2024. You have both running backs coming back. Again, key positions. Forget about the player for a moment. The positions. Your quarterbacks and your running backs are coming back. For what it's worth, wide receivers. Julian Fleming transfers in. I'm not talking about him, but you have veterans. There wasn't this turnover. There wasn't an overhaul that I called for. I did, but you do have Trey Wallace coming back. you have Caden Saunders coming back, Malik Mega, Malik McLean. And I know people might say, well, we didn't know that we wanted them to come back, but they're still coming back. It's not this fresh start, this overhaul. You do have your veterans back in the room. How about defensive line? Defensive line could have been a liability, but Devon Elliott, Hakeem Beamon. It's tough to replace Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac, but then you have Denai Dennis Sutton. Linebacker, Kobe King returns. Dom DeLuca, Tyler Elsdon, Tony Rojas. Don't forget about Abdul Carter, number 11. And then safety. Safety, you're turning multiple starters in KJ Winston, Jalen Reed, and then Zachy Wheatley, who played. So you could have hypothetically have a system where Penn State does end up starting 3 safeties, because we'll see what the transfer portal and the cornerback depth holds. Because the transfer portal is working out well to this point. When we had these discussions 2 weeks ago, fresh off of the Peach Bowl, you didn't have Julian Fleming officially committed. You didn't have Nolan Rucci. And now you're looking at the possibility and getting closer to a confirmation. I'm not here to report. I talk about the reports, right? That's what this show is. It's to make sense of what Penn State football does. It's not to report it. It's not to break news. AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber, 2 cornerbacks in the transfer portal, are in the student directory. I didn't do this detective work. I'll give credit to the Penn State accounts on X, formerly known as Twitter, but AJ Harris is in the student directory, and that's what happened with Malik McLean. Malik McLean didn't make this announcement last year's portal cycle, and said, I'm committed to Penn State. Casually showed up as a student and then was on the football team. So if AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber's interesting. Jalen Kimber was committed to Louisville, and Penn State, allegedly, for Louisville, who's absolutely, they have no restrictions, no regulations when it comes to their NIL presence. Penn State was able to flip Kimber away from Louisville. That's impressive. That's really impressive, especially since he was at Florida. Texas A&M was involved in his recruitment. So Penn's back to this is the transfer portal is going well for them. You look at the teams, the schools that they fended off in this age of NIL: Auburn, Texas A&M, Florida, Louisville, the schools that allegedly don't exactly have the whole success with honor thing. And Penn State was able to beat them in one-on-one battles for key players that both schools needed. AJ Harris wasn't going to Auburn. If he was, he's from Alabama too. Harris wasn't going to go to Auburn to be a role player, to be a backup, depth. He was going there to be a starter. And Penn State was able to, and James Franklin were able to out-recruit Auburn, out-recruit Texas A&M, Louisville, to get those 2 players right now for the moment. So take it for what you will, because we do need to preface that just because they're in the student directory we don't know for sure until they're actually present at practice or seen on campus, right? But I will say this about AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber. You have instant starters right there if everything goes right. AJ Harris is a former top 50 player in the class of 2023. Jalen Kimber is a veteran in college football. I lean to say that Kimber is slightly more important because he was a starter in the SEC last year. I know how talented AJ Harris is. I know the potential's there, and it's just a matter of tapping into it. Jalen Kimber, though, has the starting experience and the longevity. Both of those 2, if and when they are officially on Penn State's roster, would be your 2 starting cornerbacks. That's how I see it. And it's no disrespect to Cam Miller. It's no disrespect to Zion Tracy or Elliott Washington. I still think Elliott Washington can finish as one of the better lockdown cornerbacks and has the potential to live up to the comparison of a Kalen King or a Joey Porter Jr., and that's high praise. But these 2 guys, AJ Harris being a former 5-star, depending on where you look, and Jalen Kimber with the multiple years of experience in college football and starting at Florida a season ago, that will get you into the starting lineup for Penn State because of where the cornerback depth is. Remember, Penn State is replacing both coordinators. Andy Kotelnicki, Tom Allen come in. Mike Yursich was fired. And Tom Allen replaces Manny Diaz, who led the best defense in the country from what we've seen. Better than Michigan's, better than Ohio State's. Talked about that in the opening segment that, well, they squandered that defense. But you're getting two masterminds when it comes to football. Total Nicky is going to run an offense, and this James Franklin is very strategic with who he hires and who he picks. He doesn't box in and say, I need a coordinator that fits exactly what I want to do. Do you notice how the systems change based on the trajectory of college football? A multiple offensive system matters, and you need the players to be able to run it. Andy Kotelnicki did more with less at Kansas. So the idea is that you bring him in and he's able to do even more with more. But Kotelnicki's offense is now going to be designed not to just fit what the Big Ten does, but fit what those schools coming over from the Pac-12. And we've seen the shift in coaches. So even though you can say, okay, Michigan State's been in the Big Ten, but Jonathan Smith's coming over from Oregon State. So you can technically say that 5 teams are coming over from the Pac-12 in this case. But Kotelnicki's offense isn't going to be designed for the Big Ten of old. It's going to be designed to compete with Ohio State and Washington in back-to-back weeks. It's not going to be cookie cutter. It's going to be dynamic. Tom Allen, the same thing. Tom Allen, and not that Manny Diaz's defense wouldn't adjust or couldn't adjust because it's the number one defense. You would. But Tom Allen's the same way. Tom Allen knows what it's like to coach in the SEC. He knows what it's like to be a head coach in the Big Ten, and he's seen it all. So he's going to adapt his defense. I'm almost led to believe that Tom Allen was going to run a 4-2-5 defense just because of what you had. But if you're able to get 2 corners that are able to lock down both sides of the boundary, you can have your base 4-3 defense and still be ready for the likes of, well, they're not playing Michigan this year, but Illinois in this case. A 4-2-5 defense isn't exactly all that effective against Illinois. Unless you're really good at running it and have the talent to do it, you need to make some adjustments with your base defense. But my point being is that Tom Allen's going to do the same thing, have a multiple system defense that is able to counter what Washington will want to do. Kalen DeBoer is not going to change his offense. That Washington offense with now Will Rogers transferring him is going to look very reminiscent to what Michael Penix did this last season. The faces of the team for Penn State, of course, Drew Aller, Nicholas Singleton, Denai Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter. You got to rally around these guys. You have your special teams captains coming back in Malik Mega and Dom DeLuca. So we'll see what you would ideally like your veteran quarterback to now be a captain. Nicholas Singleton screams captain to me, so I think he will be. And Denai Dennis Sutton, his energy level, the way that he's able to motivate teammates, motivate just the group to be highly energetic. These are the faces of your team in addition to being captains. But I also look to KJ Winston, Abdul Carter. Of course, those guys have first-round pick written on them defensively. And Penn State's name of the game has been defense these past few years. And I think that's going to continue unless the offense can get it going and really take that baton. So that's a way too early general look at what Penn State. Break it down more as the news continues to develop. What does the Big Ten look like? What about an early look at the Big Ten? Because conference expansion. There's not 10 teams in the conference anymore. I know it was well past that now, but Penn State is going to be in a new system that is going to be certainly unforgiving. And we'll talk about it next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Today's episode is also brought to you by Jace Medical. And I know we come to sports to escape some of the crazy realities of life, but can we talk just for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. And this is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if someone I cared about or a loved one, my kids, right, hypothetically got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from a life-saving medication that they needed. And thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, skin infections, among others. And this stuff could happen to any of us, unfortunately. But you can visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. So you get savings there. You also get savings here. It's never been more important to be prepared today. You go to jacemedical.com and use promo code locked on to get $20 off your order. jacemedical.com with offer code locked on to get $20 off. And in this final segment, remember, if you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast for the latest conversations around Penn State football, men's basketball, and so much more. Check in on the comments again. Enjoy doing these live shows with all of you to have these conversations directly. Gavin says, so they are both committed silently. I think Fleming was for a long time while before announcing. That's what it seems to be. Names are in the student directory. Can go look it up, especially AJ Harris. AJ is an acronym for his name, but his name is very noticeable if you actually do look it up in the student directory. I wanted to confirm this, but both of them, Harris and Kimber, are currently listed as Penn State students. Take that for what it's worth. Robert says, success without honor. Now, apologists abound throughout the media. In terms of if you're referring to NIL or Michigan, maybe, because we've had those different conversations about how schools approach the NIL and Michigan, right? Allegedly cheating. I have to be careful with what I say, but there are some people that are going to defend Michigan, as you can see with the undisputed world champions. Gavin also adds, Penn State has a bunch of NIL money. I don't think it was anything to really worry about. I think the stadium renovation was the number one priority the past 2 years. Yeah, you got to allocate resources where you see fit, and Pat Kraft is probably easily one of the best athletic directors in all the country. Penn State is very, very lucky to have him, and he is the person to navigate all of this when financials are changing. But I think NIL is going to become less of a free-for-all in the wild, wild west when they settle in and say, okay, we need an actual collective bargaining agreement. I only know so much about that. That is not my cup of tea. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in any of that. But that's what's coming down the pipeline. A CBA and a rights agreement that says players will be paid a portion of TV contracts, advertising revenue, whatever it may be. It's just a matter of fixing all of the legalese that will go with it. An early look at the Big Ten in 2024 because it's now expanding. So what was the Big Ten is since Rutgers and Maryland joined. Now you have the 4 schools from the Pac-12, originally just USC and UCLA, Oregon and Washington. But I think there's going to be a reality check for these schools as they come in. We saw what Michigan was able to do to Washington. Excuse me. Michigan was able to do to Washington in that championship game. So I got to imagine, at least early on, that's going to be somewhat of the normal in this case. Now, Oregon's very talented. Washington's very talented. Those teams are well coached, but they're going to get a little bit of a reality check that, oh, these spread offenses and the spread defenses only work so much. This isn't the West Coast anymore. You got to deal with this and one bowl game or one playoff game. You got to deal with this on a regular basis. So Washington or whoever else, right? We'll take, how about a USC going to Illinois? USC might be the favorite on paper, but that's not going to be a fun matchup with Brett Bielema, for example. The Big Ten is wide open. It is. It's truly wide open. Now, I look at Ohio State and Oregon, and I would put them as probably the perennial favorites if I'm going to project for the Big Ten, but there's the transfer portal cycle we're in currently. There's going to be the second transfer portal cycle at the end of spring football. A lot can move. So I can't say right now, do Oregon, USC, Michigan. We're still waiting to hear what's going to happen with a lot of these schools because, as I mentioned in the earlier segment, all these schools have different starting quarterbacks. Ohio State, Oregon, UCLA, USC, Michigan expectedly, Michigan State, Maryland, just to name some of them. You have to wait and see what's going to happen. Because look, I don't include Michigan as my perennial favorite for 2024 because J.J. McCarthy could go to the NFL. Blake Corum has to. Donovan Edwards could. He had an incredible game. The entire offensive line is projected to go to the NFL. And then what about the head coach, for crying out loud? Jim Harbaugh could go to the NFL and sign with any of those teams. Tennessee Titans just fired their head coach. Los Angeles Chargers have been linked to hiring Jim Harbaugh. I thought the Chicago Bears were going to fire Matt Eberflus, and that would make sense for Jim Harbaugh, but we see that's not the case. But if Jim Harbaugh was willing to flirt with the NFL as much as he did, that he sat down in an 8 to 10 hour meeting with the Minnesota Vikings the last time they had a head coaching opening, and was, his hand was so close to the pen that he was almost close to signing that contract. What's stopping him from doing that again, especially when his roster might be completely overturned? And he accomplished what he set out to do and bring a national championship back to Ann Arbor. I hate saying it. It happened, so it is reality. But if all those things change for Michigan this late in the cycle with the next upcoming season, that's going to put Michigan back. I imagine they probably promote Sharon Moore. I've seen Brian Kelly linked to from LSU to go to Michigan. I think they would promote Sharon Moore to probably try to keep it together. But Washington, USC, and UCLA and Oregon will be challenged to change their playing style. Are they going to be static and stubborn and say that we can beat Michigan, we can beat Ohio State, we can beat Penn State with the way that we've been playing? After you see now on tape, it's not like this was a field goal game. This was 34-13, a Michigan ambush of Washington. So are those schools going to adapt or be stuck in their ways? It's a total free-for-all, because how are these schools going to adjust with the new schedules? How is Oregon going to do? Even though Oregon is as talented as it is on paper, paper only gets you so far. How are they going to perform against whoever? Illinois, Purdue, Maryland, Michigan State, any teams that they don't play on a regular basis? How's Penn State going to adjust with that? They got to play 3 of them in one season and travel along the West Coast. So we've talked about, the Nittany Lions are going to have an issue taking a plane to USC in the middle of the season because that's never been done before. But what about the inverse of that? UCLA's got to come to Happy Valley, come to Beaver Stadium. Washington's got to come to Beaver Stadium later in the season. How will teams adjust to all of this travel? We don't know until we actually see it. And remember, these aren't professional players that do it on a regular basis. For 8 or 9 games out of the season before playoffs, they are traveling all over the place, but that's their job. That is their job. I know that conference expansion has happened, and yes, Penn State has traveled a little bit, but not like this, not this consistently. You have to go to USC, then you have a bye week, then you got to go to Wisconsin. That's what a pro team does, not a college team. And these are 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old players, not 27, 28, who have been doing this for a long time. They still have to get used to it. So Penn State has a rough 5-game stretch, but so do the other schools. The other schools do as well. Divisions are gone. Best teams. The best decision that the Big Ten has made was getting rid of divisions, and you can't just do that. You can't just load these 4 schools into the Big Ten and into the Big Ten West, I should say. But the Big Ten got that right by making sure that divisions were gone. And now you have truly a free-for-all. That's what this is. The 2024 Big Ten slate is a free-for-all. Anybody can emerge. Some teams are better suited than others. I think Penn State is better suited than other schools with Big Ten expansion right now. Ohio State, Oregon. I would put Penn State slightly underneath with what we've seen, and that's what goes back to what I said about the transfer portal. Penn State is addressing needs with Julian Fleming, with Nolan Rucci, by getting Hakeem Beamon and Devon Ellis back. When we had this conversation right after the Peach Bowl, it was different because we didn't know about any of it. And now we do. We're starting to get some clarity. So now add Andy Kotelnicki, who's going to run an offensive system that is matched, that is going to be able to take on Ohio State one week, Washington, USC, UCLA another week. It's complicated, and I hope Penn State's players are up to the challenge because they're going to have to learn a lot for that kind of system. One more time, we'll look at the comments here. Robert and Jeffrey, I appreciate it. You guys are very interested in what we have to say here on Locked On Nittany Lions today. West Coast teams have a killer schedule and scheme issues. We are good compared to them. Okay, I agree. And then just Jeffrey says, okay, thanks, Robert, because they've been. So I'm glad that you guys get to have this conversation as well. And this is, again, this is a community. I want to thank all of you for joining me on Locked On Nittany Lions, having this discussion with me as we talk more about Penn State football. We're getting ready to welcome back Eric Olson, who does color commentary for Penn State men's hockey. We'll get his perspective on the football season and what's ahead, plus what the Nittany Lions are doing on the ice. And Jeff Byers, the voice of Penn State wrestling, is going to be back soon enough as well. Those are coming down the pipeline. So can't wait to have those conversations with them and with all of you as we continue to talk about Penn State sports right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.